Good afternoon, everybody. This is Kimberly Mack. I am the Executive Director of the Alliance of People with Disabilities. We are a center for independent living that serves King County. I use she, her pronouns, and I am wearing a blue hoodie sweatshirt. I am a white female presenting woman with my hair tied back in a ponytail and sunglasses on top of my forehead. And behind me, you can see my ceiling fan. I'd like to cover some housekeeping and accessibility information this afternoon before we get started. We are recording this session so that we can post it to the King County Disability Consortium website. The URL is www.kingcounty.org/webinars, and we will also post that in the chat. Captions are available in Zoom. You can click Show Subtitle in your Zoom menu bar to turn them on. Captions are also running in streamtext.net. That URL is too long to read, but we'll paste it into the chat. Streamtext allows you to enlarge the font and change the color and contrast of captioning. There's also a chat feature on Streamtext, so you're welcome to submit questions or comments there, and we will monitor them and voice any questions during the Q&A breaks. Asl interpreters are available today, and we're presenting in gallery view, so the interpreters should always be visible. You do not need to pin them. Please know that we have 2 interpreters, so if you pin the current interpreter, it could prevent you from seeing the active interpreter after an interpreter change. You do not need to be on Zoom to access this event. We will read all questions aloud and voice any images on the screen so that the content will be available to individuals calling in on the phone who cannot see visual content. We will use both person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably, recognizing different people's preferences for person first or identity first language. So now that we've gotten the accessibility considerations gone through, I'd like to do an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. So we are coming from many places today. And I'd like to acknowledge the land where I'm joining from in King County is composed of the unceded lands and waters of the Muckleshoot, Snoqualmie, and Duwamish tribes, and we're all of which part of the larger Coast Salish indigenous people. We are grateful to live and to work as guests on these lands and express the Alliance's deepest honor and gratitude to the land itself and the Coast Salish people, who were the first people on this land and remain here today. This land acknowledgement is one small act in the ongoing process of working to be in good relationship with the land and the people of the land. If you're interested in finding out whose land you're on, we will put a link in the chat for you to review. So let me orient everyone to this event. This is the 9th session of our Understanding Ableism monthly series. These events are hosted by the King County Disability Consortium, which is composed of over 40 disability serving organizations and individual disability advocates and activists. These Understanding Ableism events are led by the disability community, promoting disability justice within the King County enterprise. In previous sessions, we've covered things like defining ableism and racialized ableism, ableism in transportation, education, employment. In July, we covered the ADA, and in August, we did ableism and reproductive rights. This month, we're covering ableism in housing and homelessness services. And we have an awesome panel with us today. I'm really excited. And Robin's gonna lead the panel discussion in this topic. So Robin, would you like to take over?
Thanks, Kimberly. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Robin Tatsuda. I'm the Executive Director at the ARC of King County. I use she, her pronouns. I identify as a biracial cis female. I have sort of olive colored skin, short, dark hair. I'm wearing headphones with a little microphone, sort of a navy blue blouse with some white patterns on it and kind of a teal over the shoulder thing. I'm sitting in my home office, which is also my guest room. And just to brag, I'm getting married next week. And so behind me, you actually see wedding related things, including my wedding dress in a bag. So I'm so excited to be here tonight. I'm so excited to get to spend time with you and to get to spend time with this incredible panel. I can't tell you how anxious and excited I've been for us to really dive into this topic in our Understanding Ableism series. Specifically being able to explore the intersection of disability within housing stability and homelessness. This actually has become a huge issue for my team at the ARC of King County and the community of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities that we serve. And while I have been in the world of developmental disability for many years, I never imagined that I would know as much as I do about how broken our housing system is. But for a little bit of context, I've been working at the ARC of King County for 9 years. And when I first came to the ARC, housing issues were really not on our radar at all. It really was not a major issue within our community at all. Fast forward 9 years, we now have 3 full-time staff whose entire jobs are to help people with intellectual and developmental disabilities prevent becoming homeless or work their way out of homelessness, or to ensure that they can secure stabilized housing long-term. And even still with those 3 people, the full needs of the community are not being met. And it certainly demonstrates to me, just in my daily work, how much of an issue housing stability and homelessness is within the disability community. So, tonight we're not going to solve these problems, unfortunately, but we do hope to be able to help folks better understand some of these issues. And sometimes I think, I don't know, if you're a data person like I am, I like to pull these stats out to just remind everyone why we're here. So, every year King County does their point in time count, the overnight count, where they're trying to get the best guess of how many folks are living unhoused in our King County region. And they pull some stats out of that. And in 2017, 50% of the unhoused population identified as having some form of disability. In 2018, 53%. In 2019, 64%. In 2020, they didn't even report that number. Although if you look at some of the disaggregated data, you can see that it's even higher. And then 2021, because of COVID, there was no point in time count, so we don't have any numbers. But if you even look at the 17, 18, 19 numbers, you can see that the escalation of unhoused folks with disabilities is just continuing to grow. And if we're going to solve our homelessness challenges and our homelessness crisis in this area, we 100% need to make sure that disability is part of that solution. So I could talk on and on, but in all honesty, we're really here tonight to listen to our panelists, our expert speakers who have lived experience and have navigated these systems and can speak from their own personal life about what it means to have a disability, what it means to experience housing instability. And then additionally, we have a guest speaker who identifies as having a disability, whose whole job is to help people navigate housing rights and stabilized housing. So without further ado, let's transition in to our panelists. So I'm actually going to invite each panelist to just sort of start off with our first question, where do an introduction for yourself, your name, your pronouns, a brief visual description, and then just kind of tell us what you want us to know about your story, why you care about housing and homelessness issues. Okay. So I'm going to start just based on the order that I've got written down. And so Stacia, you are the first person on my list. So go ahead and unmute and turn on. Hi, Stacia.
Okay. Hey there. Do you hear me okay?
I do.
Okay. Hi, my name is Stacia. I guess visual description. I am a white female presenting cisgender woman. I just have a plain white background. I've got short blonde hair and a black shirt with some white patterns on it and a little silver kitty necklace. So my pronouns are she, her. And yeah, so I was invited to this panel. I think I've known Robin since 2017, when I myself was in the midst of being homeless as an autistic person. And that was before she is at the position that she is now in the ARC. So it's really exciting to see where she is now. But yeah, I got to know Robin at that time when I was seeking resources in the midst of being homeless. And so I am in my late 30s now, and I, at a young age, I was having numerous sort of psychiatric issues, dealing with depression, anxiety. So already kind of dealing with all that stuff, dealing with medication at a young age, and dealing with, navigating college and stuff as, like having tasks for how, like I want to have a single room or this or that. And that already was just sort of opening my eyes up to this kind of like, well, you're asking for special treatment or something like that, while at the same time struggling with what was going on and struggling of not having my autism diagnosis at that time. There was always the sense that there was something more. And as a lot of autistic women go through, that only was kind of suggested to me in my late 20s. And I went to get a second opinion, and it was still confusing, but it kind of kept coming back to that. People would make comments to me, like outside my life, or comments about my childhood. And when I really read into it from the, perspective of how autism affects women in particular, it was kind of like, oh, now it really clicks. And this really describes a lot of things in my life, and, kind of things finally fit together. So yeah, I guess my background, maybe I grew up probably, my family situation, they were quite well off. So it's probably a bit surprising that I ended up in this situation on SSDI, and basically having to navigate homelessness systems on my own. But it was really eye-opening in a lot of ways, and it really just, it kind of, there's a lot of dynamics navigating everything as someone who's disabled. And a lot of them are kind of the same dynamics that you're doing with employment and everything else, but just so much more amplified because you don't have those basic needs met. And yeah, so I'm here tonight to kind of maybe speak more about that personal experience and the barriers I found it, and kind of what worked and what didn't. There were certainly things that worked, and yeah, kind of help give a perspective from that lived experience. So
This is Robin, and I'll let the interpreter switch. Perfect. So thank you, Stacia. I'm so glad you're here. I appreciate you joining us. And I loved getting to know you and supporting you, but I also just have also learned a lot and consider you to be an incredibly giving person and sharing your experiences so others can have better. So we're so glad you're here. And I think it's also really important to say, I just jotted a note down, that one thing that's common in the world, especially of autism, but people with many different forms of disabilities often are disconnected from their families. And so the financial security of the family may not in any way predict the housing security of a person with a disability. And so I think that's an important consideration that goes into supporting our folks, that there's a lot of dynamics that go into it that lead to a person being where they are. So thanks, Stacia. Next on my list is Ariana. Ariana, can you come on and introduce yourself, share your pronouns, and just a little bit about kind of who you are and why you're here?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hello, my name is Ariana Loriano, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white passing Puerto Rican trans woman with bold black glasses and long curly brown hair, let loose over my black t-shirt, which has Bernie written across it. I lived on SSI for the past decade, struggling with epilepsy. I've been homeless multiple times in multiple states. I'm not going to go into the suffering of the past decade, but it all stems from the fact that we as a society force the disabled to try to survive in our for-profit housing industry on less than $10,000 a year. And that's why I care about housing issues. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ariana. So succinct, but poignant. If SSI is your sole source of income, you make less than $800 a month. And in King County, that puts you at approximately 13% area median income, or AMI. It is pretty much impossible to find housing without some sort of extra subsidy or support if your income is $800 a month in King County. So Ariana's point is very important to consider. Thank you. And then last but not least for our panel is Christina. Christina, if you want to unmute and turn your camera on and introduce yourself, we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. My name is Christina Savitsky, and I have an olive skin with jet black hair, and usually I take my glasses on and off and I have a pink shirt on with my little earrings from my grandmother, which are blue and white and red from my tribe. And I don't use pronouns, and I'm in my house, which is my van. So, and it's a, beige ceiling, and occasionally you might see, doors and windows if I move the phone around. And for me, at first I sit on the continuum of care board with Robin, and no, she'll describe that. But for me, I'm a disabled veteran, and the VA moved me from one state to another for a program that broke apart not even 2 weeks after I got here. And so that program was supposed to help support myself and my family. I came with children and a husband at the time, and he did not get the supports anymore. The state did not offer the supports that we had gotten in the past. And so I was left in my van by myself, where I've kind of been with caregivers that are just community friends that check in and help me with my meds and other things that I need. And for me, it's just my unhoused neighbors are what keep me going, and also what brings me great joy in the day as we struggle through this day and night. I've experienced a lot of domestic violence in my life, which has made trust and other issues very hard for me. And so that's pretty much my story.
Christina, I'm so glad you're here as well. I really am thankful for all of you joining us tonight. And, we might hear more if people are up for sharing, but I think it's so poignant that you mentioned that that domestic violence has been part of your story as well, because it is a common story for people with disabilities. People with disabilities experience astronomically higher rates of interpersonal violence, domestic violence, gender-based violence. And again, that is part of our story and part of what is part of the larger sort of housing instability and homelessness story. And so I appreciate you mentioning it tonight, and I'm glad you're here. So let's jump into the meat of this conversation. I'm gonna give it back to Stacia. Stacia, can you tell us a bit about your experience as a disabled person navigating the system of homelessness services and housing, et cetera? And tell us a bit about what was or wasn't helpful for you, those kinds of things.
Yeah, sure. So I guess thinking back on my personal story, to give a little bit of context, I was living, I guess the situation that led to homelessness is I was living abroad to kind of see if I could fix all the problems and that I was running into here in the US. And it was clear, I'm still running into, these, autistic or not, overseas, I'm still running into, and even with socialized medicine, I'm still running into the same issues. So I ended up back at home with family, and I've been on SSDI since my early 20s. So I did have that support network, but I've always needed, like I spoke about these accommodations in college, I've always done so much better if I have my own, private space. And that's been a barrier to, housing stuff, like situations often where, there's, you can rent a room or something. I've never felt safe with that. And especially, being with family and stuff like that, tensions can rise high. And I wouldn't call it, I ended up using domestic violence services, but it was a bit of a tough situation, right? It wasn't, I felt a little bit uncomfortable being in that realm. I did end up in a DV shelter before all this happened. But for me, it was more the intersection between tensions had risen so high in the household for family members that were sort of not equipped at that level, not tending to their own mental health, and kind of, leading to these patterns where, they're not caring for themselves, they're becoming inadvertently, like yelling, verbally abusive and stuff like that. And I no longer felt safe in that situation. And I ended up going to the crisis centers. And they were like, so I came basically out of a sort of more liberal domestic violence shelter, and it was interesting talking to the people there because regardless of my situation, I felt self-conscious about it, but we had similar stories and similar feelings. And then from there, that was in another state. So I had previously been in Seattle most of my adult life before moving overseas, and I knew the area well, and I sort of just went back to Seattle. I stayed with friends for about 2 weeks in a situation that was, like I said, sort of like a room, and it didn't give me much freedom. And then I had to kind of figure out, okay, what's going to happen here? And as I've told other people, that it might not be for everyone, but for me, I would rather, sleep on the floor at some sort of, shelter for, 5 years or indefinitely, and then have that end up in something like me finding my own more secure, my private apartment or something, rather than, skipping from home to home, paying a large portion of my SSDI for a room, not feeling safe emotionally in those situations, because at least I felt like kind of like, I'm not really sure why, but that's, kind of the choice I made. And I ended up, what worked for me is I went to, I did find one of these programs that allowed you to be, to pay a fee to get access to a guaranteed place on the floor, and sort of more flexibility within the programs. And that was Angelin's downtown. And I did get some degree of, I felt that was actually a really useful dynamic for me versus other ones, because there was a very caring case manager, and she actually was able to make me and other people with disabilities accommodations. Like me and another woman were able to sleep in there was a little private library room or a private nursing room. And so when we were having anxiety, we actually did have our private space, which was pretty amazing. And I felt like that particular caseworker was the key there, because she really understood this is a thing. They're on SSDR. They've got and she's probably empathetic, and she's seen people like this in these situations that, and they know it's going to spiral. So I feel like I was just incredibly lucky to have somebody who knew that. But I felt like what was difficult there is that the other people at the shelter would view that as some, like I said, in college and stuff like that, this is somehow favoritism or something like that. It's like, oh, you're not really disabled. I did have people yelling at me, you're not autistic. My kid who can't speak or whatever, that's autism. A lot of verbal abuse from people not understanding the situation. But they were definitely overworked, but the case worker really understood that. And I felt like being persistent with them and going and sort of with my autism superpowers, sort of casting a wide net, getting connected with the ARC, getting connected with anything that I could think of in terms of third party casework or mental health stuff or the DV stuff I was involved in, just so I could not overwhelm anyone's system, and kind of felt what worked for me. I felt that was stuff that worked for me. I did look into other things, and something that came out to me a lot was these programs that had a work-based component. And that definitely always stood out to me as being a huge barrier, like one that I could barely even have a conversation with them about, when calling or trying to get more information. And I feel like that's something that really needs to be addressed. A lot of programs were just absolutely closed off to me because of the inflexibility of that work requirement. Which I'm pretty sure, I don't know how that's even legal, but yeah, I think for me, I just happened to get extremely, extremely lucky with that one caseworker, understanding and having worked with people with disabilities in the past and knowing that this is the thing. And it still made it very hard interacting with other people, but who didn't understand the full story. But at least I did have, you know, when she had time and she, you know, like, because I get the reality there, but she understood. And I thought that really went so long, and they were able to place me, they were able to kind of get me on track to, you know, sort of finding a more private room and getting my way out of that. So, so yeah, that's kind of, I hope I wasn't missing any. I guess that ended up on me being, I'm trying to think about when I should talk about the current situation. That's another question, correct? With my current
Yeah.
stability.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not going over and splitting things up. So
Yeah.
that's, yeah. Sorry. I
Yeah.
hope that wasn't too all over
No,
the place.
that was
That's-
perfect,
yeah.
Stacia. Absolutely. That was perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. And I just want to echo, I mean, I think one of the common themes that we've experienced at the ARC and that we hear from the people we serve is systemically, the system around helping people move out of homelessness or helping people maintain stability in housing, the system itself is not designed to make sure that people with disabilities are equitably served and equitably success within that work. And it really comes down to the luck of finding somebody who sees you and cares and recognizes the need for accommodations or recognizes that need for something. And so, Stacia, I'm so happy that you were able to find that person that made it happen for you, but that is not a guarantee that everybody's going to find that person. And so that's part of what I think has led to the horrifying statistics that we have. So thank you. Ariana, you're up next. It's the same question, but I'll say it again. Tell us a bit about your experience as a disabled person navigating the systems of homelessness services and housing, et cetera, and what was helpful for you, what was not, that kind of thing.
Okay. So I guess I should preface this by saying that every single time I've become unhoused, it has been a result of a room for rent situation becoming toxic and abusive. Every single time. I have never been able to make the choice to stay in a shelter and put myself in that position in order to get access to affordable housing. I am not on any drugs, and there's certain lines I don't qualify for affordable housing generally. It's appropriated to people who are in shelter, or by word, you know, a case of severity. So I've always just rented rooms ever since I started having really severe seizures. And anytime that situation became violent, it generally looked like me losing everything I own and then going onto the streets and starting over. Shelters don't really work for me. I'm high functioning on the spectrum, which means I burn a large part of my IQ in order to be socially acceptable. And if I don't do that, I fall to pieces. People can't understand me at all. So the more stressed I am, the lower my IQ, the less energy I have to dedicate towards being even remotely understandable. So anytime I was in this abusive situation, the situation never got bad enough to the point where I could get into crisis care. You can't get a recommendation for crisis care except for from the police or from a hospital. My mother abused the mental health system a lot when I was a child, and so I'm very scared of hospitals, equally scared of police officers. So I've only been recommended into a crisis center once, and that was because I was picked up injured by the cops, unconscious, and so they managed to refer me to a crisis center. But when I got to the crisis center, I found out that they accepted a large portion of their funding from the federal government. And even though I was in a legal state, my epilepsy, I have it in remission right now through cannabis, through medical cannabis. And so on that grounds, I don't qualify for any services that take federal aid. So the options to get services were doubly prohibitive. It was not only you need to start working within this set of time, which is really bad. What you need to understand about that is once you start working, you lose all your benefits. You lose your Social Security. I'm on SSI because I was born with a serious disability. And I never got to put in the work time to get on SSDI. So as soon as I start working within a very short time period, all my benefits are gone. So the idea of having to work to get services is like saying, hey, I'll give you a place to stay for a month, but I'm going to take away the lifeline you've had for 8 years. So nobody's going to take that. On top of that, they would also say, hey, we'll give you a place to stay, but we're going to take you off of this medication that has your condition in remission. And we're going to put you on this other medication that has a history of barely working for you. And we'll hop you from medication to medication until we're sure that the medications don't work for you, even though your medical records say you've tried all this before. So I stayed in a tent. Government services, all the services in Seattle were incredibly prohibitive for someone like me and completely inaccessible. They were more destructive to my life than they were helpful.
Ariana, I just want to first off just sort of express my care and empathy and compassion for just the fact that you experienced what I can only describe as trauma. And I want to thank you for sharing these experiences, knowing that that's an emotional labor that you carry with you. So I want to thank you for that. And I think your story is so important because it's not unique, unfortunately, that folks with disabilities are forced to choose between resources. And we're going to talk more about sort of the ways that housing services are tied to work expectations. So I'm not going to dig into that. But disabled folks are put in positions where they have to choose between access to their health care or access to their cash benefits or access to housing, et cetera, that all these different things are not just available and guaranteed, they're contingencies. So I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I appreciate just that emotional labor that you also experienced to help us better understand this. So Christina, you're next. I'll just restate it in case you forgot the question. Just tell us a bit tell us a bit about your experience as a disabled person navigating homeless services, housing, etc. Have there been things that have been positive or have worked, things that have not, that kind of thing?
Well, first, I have already mentioned I'm a disabled veteran, but I had a moderate brain injury as well as an incomplete C5, C6 spinal cord injury in 1988 when I was 20 years old. And with that, I did not know the world of disability until that point. And that it's, taken a long time for me to understand it, mainly because my brain injury typically is what gets in my biggest challenge. And then after that, it's my friendly wheelchair. And for me, I struggle because I'm easily, I struggle with my brain injury symptoms a lot. I can say I started college in 1987 and I just graduated 3 weeks ago with my bachelor's degree. And that's how long it took me with my brain injury to finish school. And so it's the same thing with applications. I have not found the level of support I need for things like the patience with the application, somebody to help me write it, somebody to explain things to me, to explain the process, to remind me of what I need to do next when I forget. There have been so many organizations that have been so intolerant of my brain injury because I present as smart, and intelligence has nothing to do with my brain injury, or, it just doesn't. And so I'm forgetful. I get upset. I get angry. I get frustrated. My brain gets tired. And so organizations have a hard time understanding and have not had a lot of compassion with that. So that has been a huge challenge for me. On top of, I am not the one size, and most of us with disabilities are not the one size fits all. We don't just fit in this type of disability character or this one. And for me, they would find this great brain injury program that was not wheelchair accessible, or the other way around, a physically disabled accessible program that just very impatient. And dealing with the VA, they every time, even currently when I go into the VA, they want to put me in a nursing home. That is the first thing they offer me. And so I don't complain. So when they put me on with a relative and for a short time and I'm getting caregiver abuse, I'm not about to go tell the VA that my caregiver didn't give me meds for 2 days, because they are so quick to say, here's a nursing home bed for you. Here, we've got this place to put you. And I'm so terrified of that, because I've been in a VA nursing home. I spent several months there, and I was only 22 at the time, and it was not comfortable then. And I know it has not improved at all. Nursing homes are horrific. And so, you know, going back to the VA, I have that fear of them, and they're kind of like I always call it my black cloud over me, because I don't get Social Security benefits at all. I'm a disabled vet, so I get my 70%, which is VA garbage for, I get $1,400 a month. And so I do get backup Medicaid, but it's back up to the VA. So it's like, if the VA writes a letter and says, we can't provide, or we don't provide, or it's going to take us months, Medicaid will do that. And sometimes I'll slip in emergency rooms to get that care to avoid the VA as much as possible. But for me, it really has been intersectionality of just the disability types. My last attempt on my life was the first week of June this year. And when I is in the emergency room and they were stitching me up, their comment was, now don't do that. You shouldn't be hurting yourself. And I said, well, I need help. And they're like, we don't have anywhere that can take somebody that can bathe you, give you your meds, and also provide psychiatric support services for you. All the psychiatric spots, you have to be independent of all your activities of daily living. And it's like, so I can't be physically disabled, have a mental health disability, and have a brain injury at the same time and get the services. And so that's pretty much what I've run into with all services, including homelessness services, is I don't fit in that peg, that peg. I am outside. I've got more than one pegs. And so they all kind of come together and they all make up me. And the system is not able to understand that, or not in a way to accept that. And it becomes a huge challenge for that. I know my vulnerability score, is 14, and I know, what I need and what I don't need. And I know I'm also a full-time college student, what I'm eligible for and not eligible for. And it's just, you don't fit what's out there. And that becomes very frustrating.
Christina, first, let's all celebrate the fact that you just completed your degree. Congratulations. That's phenomenal. That's a huge accomplishment. Good job. Wow. Yay. And then also recognize that, gosh, you said so many important and powerful things just then that are just, I mean, in my own experiences supporting people, all the things you said, it's just, you completely nailed it. I think one of the things I really latched onto was there's not an understanding of sort of executive functioning support needs of people, or how people's executive functioning might change situationally. We had heard earlier from Ariana that she spends so much time just putting energy towards sort of fitting in socially, that her ability to sort of navigate the world sort of using her intellect becomes challenged, and people don't understand that. Stacia put in the comments that people often make an assumption that she appears like she should be able to do so many things. And then it's common to then assume that disabled people are being lazy or having a bad attitude or somehow not trying or expecting handouts, when it's really tied to disability that's not being understood or supported. You also went on to say that disabilities tend to be are so siloed. There's this assumptions that you only have a brain injury, but you couldn't also be a wheelchair user, or you only have this, but it couldn't be that, or that you have to be so extremely impacted by your disability, including drug use and including actively experiencing violence and things in order to be prioritized, when there are so many people who are just falling out of the radar, who are not qualifying, who are not being recognized as highly vulnerable folks, who are in need of support. These are just stories that we hear endlessly at the ARC by people with disabilities. And then additionally, Stacia wrote a comment in the chat that I just have to read out loud, because I think it just really succinctly summarizes. Stacia said, "I think all of our stories include having to accept or tolerate abuse over losing everything. That you have had to choose kind of the better of two evils in a way, which in and of itself is not an okay thing to ever have to do, but that's the story of people with disabilities that is never understood." So thank you for sharing all of that. Again, I'm so thankful you're here. I'm just going to keep plowing through because there's so much to talk about. And I'm going to jump to the next question. And Stacia, you're up again. Stacia, we've already mentioned this a little bit, but I'd love any additional thoughts you have on how homelessness and housing stability services are so closely tied to work and the expectation that people can and will engage in competitive employment. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are, your experiences are, those kinds of things with this.
Sure. Yeah, this is something that's really always been so important to me, as a dynamic sort of coming into be learning about the social model of disability and learning more about disability theory. That's an eye opener, right? Because society really piles all this stuff on you with capitalism and this sort of old school puritanical view about work is your worth as an individual. And I've often noticed that the people with disabilities who often succeed within the systems are the ones who can fit that kind of view. It's like you often see these almost like inspiration. It's like, wow, this is so cute, look at this little grocery store autistic guy that loves stacking all these boxes and stuff, and that's great, right? But that's really losing the bigger picture, that the reason he's sort of being validated or tolerated in society is because he's also able to interface with something that we consider this kind of moral thing in the society, which is that work somehow equals your worth as an individual. So I've often found that it's not so hard. Sometimes my issues in my life stem less from being disabled and more from being somebody who doesn't work due to the disability. I feel like, it's the first question, like, what do you do? Sometimes I'll have a story because I don't want to go into it, but sometimes I'm just gonna like, look, I'm on benefits, like, and then the person's like, well, but what do you do? Like, I do rock climbing and I go to work, like, how does that work? And it's like, dude, I'm not gonna have this emotional, like, this is not my job, right? So it's like either I be myself or I'm hiding myself all the time. It's very damaging emotionally to not just that. I talked to somebody about this recently, the dynamic of even the smallest little, hey, how are you feeling? I'm not feeling great because I'm chronically ill. What do you do? These smallest little interactions are just these microaggressions for people with disabilities. And I've just been so upset at navigating the system of how it's almost like work solves everything. And in addition to that, having these kind of old school case managers who are maybe from a time where some of these things maybe did apply more, and not understanding the dynamics right now of actually getting a job or being a disabled person now. So the reality is, even if you are looking for that or you would excel in that area, it's not the same thing. It's not going to lead to the same thing as some kind of security that it might in the 60s with these, where some of these caregivers, it's case workers, I keep saying that, case workers at DVR and so forth have this very weird picture of how things were when they were growing up and how they saw vocational experiences change people. That's not really the case anymore, especially with COVID. More and more, you're seeing people be honest, even able-bodied people, about their own experiences vocationally. And especially with autism and masking, I think for me, any kind of, I have to be there every day. I have to be with the same group of people that's not accommodating me. Not, I'm masking all the time. That's not sustainable and it's very common. Autism work burnout, 6-9 months, you quit the job, you're hospitalized. And a lot of people don't understand that dynamic. And for me, SSDI has been absolutely a lifeline for me. And that was essential during homelessness as well. And it was so frustrating for me to have to kind of explain this when vocational options would be pushed on me as if it were like, and I would push back and I would say like, you know what, I know myself at this point, this is going to lead to hospitalization for me. Like you can try to tell me this or that. And every time I've tried to come up with something, that's, works for myself, like that's a self-employment, that's your own thing, it's very specific situations, so it's working within an organization like the ARC, a place that understands by definition. So absolutely, I think it's a disservice to people with disabilities almost thinking like work's gonna fix everything. And especially for a lot of people with developmental disabilities, oh, work's gonna be a place to get your social stuff. Absolutely not. That is the worst place to get your social stuff as a thing, as a person with psychiatric developmental disability stuff, because it's extremely difficult to navigate, what's a friend, what's not, that's not those aren't supports, those are coworkers. And that's a very hard concept to navigate, even for able-bodied people. So I think this push for work above all should be pushed on what do you want to do? What works for you? Actual person-centered versus person-centered as a buzzword. Focus, let's go back to college. Let's go back to what are you actually interested in versus work above all, because this is a Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. Work isn't going to solve the problem. It's just something that's being thrown out there as almost kind of just this, cure all. And people who can't work, people who are chronically going to have it made worse by this disability, need to be listened to. I'm not on SSDI for no reason, and I don't need people to gaslight me about that anymore. And that was extremely triggering for me within the homelessness system. That's like now suddenly everything is offered to you if you're like compliant enough. No, not everyone's going to be in that situation. So that's something absolutely I think needs to be validated. Offer people services that are not just, work is going to solve everything as some moral, it's not okay, and it leads to further trauma. People assuming that that's going to solve everything. That's the reason I'm on SSDI. Do you want me to take a job, lose SSDI, and now this happens again? It doesn't make any sense to be told that again and again. So
thank you so much, Stacia. I can feel the passion, and I can feel the fact that you have been traumatized by just this experience over time, repeatedly in so many different ways. And I appreciate you sharing that. I have so many thoughts, but I just want to keep going because I know that Ariana and Christina also have experiences and thoughts on this. So Ariana, you've spoken a little already, but I would love to hear what additional you have to add, just sort of about this, how much work seems to be tied into expectations related to housing services.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of the same stuff Stacia has said about, losing your services and losing your disability check and how serious that can be. I was just thinking about mental degradation. Right now, I sit on the Renters Commission. I'm getting officiated here by the City Council pretty soon. I'm the legislative lead for the 43rd district in our state, and I run the workshops for Be Seattle, which is a 501c3 nonprofit. If you had found me 2 years ago, I was incoherent and could barely speak. I couldn't fill out the form I needed for food. I couldn't remember my last name. I couldn't spell it because I was so stressed out by abuse and being unhoused. And so when you're talking about someone who has a developmental disability or a learning disability, it's like saying it's putting the cart before the horse, you know? Like maybe that's society's goal is to have all of us working, which I don't agree with that goal. I think it stems from us treating housing as a commodity and not as a human right. Um, I don't think we should be forced to work in order to have housing stability. I currently exist in that situation where, you know, who knows, 9 months from now, like Stacia said, I could just be in a hospital without any benefits and needing to reapply. But where I'm at right now was 2 years of effort to get here. So hopefully that doesn't happen. There's been a lot of foundation put in place before I went and started working and put my disability check at risk. And so I just want to say that asking anybody who is in a state of crisis to work in order to have any modicum of stability is counterproductive. It's putting the cart before the horse. Like that's just, it's not a smart or intelligent policy. We need to get rid of the mandate to work in order to access recovery services altogether. It shouldn't be allowed. That's all I have to share.
Thank you so much. That was so just spot on, well said, so clear. I'm not going to add anything to it, but I'm going to ask Christina to add your perspective.
My not dealing with Social Security and some of these things, coming from the VA perspective, it's more of a shut up, sit at home and enjoy your benefits approach to it all. I have been pushing for work. I want to work. I really want to stay busy. I like staying busy. I volunteer 40+ hours a week. I want to stay busy. I do not get the supports. I will never get the supports I need from the Veterans Administration, and that is unfortunate. And so I struggle with getting the supports and trying to find the supports in the community to be able to work. Even the VA has their own VOC rehab program, and it's essentially they send a check to wherever you're going to school, and that's it. So I know with working with volunteering what I need and the struggles I have with my brain injury in a work environment. And so now I'm currently trying to find the supports myself, not only in the Seattle area, but I've reached out to veterans group nationwide. And because I'm an older vet, I'm before 9/11. 95% of the programs only help after 9/11 veterans. And so finding the support I need that actually is what I need is a huge challenge. And so I'm very fearful that when I go out and get a job, I'm not going to have the supports I need and I will fail. And failure in itself isn't bad, but I know what my problems are and I know what I need to work on. And had I had that training and that ability, I'd have the really good, strong option of being successful. So for me, it's trying to fight the, don't waste your time doing what you're doing. You know, the VA was never behind me on getting my degree. And the only reason they're funding me to get my master's program is because I did so well and got so many recommendations from Seattle University to go on to the next degree, that with learning about accommodations through Seattle U and getting the right accommodations, I was able to graduate. Now I could go on further, but I also need the supports in the workplace and to be able to work. And so that's my dream and hope, is that I can keep on a track where I can get those supports and eventually I can get my own house and be self-sufficient. So that's my experience with the work aspect of it. Is we're told, as a lot of veterans who are severely disabled, to enjoy your benefits and be happy with what you've got.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. It just gives me a yucky feeling that there's an attitude like that conveyed to you. Just enjoy it and be thankful for what you've got. And I think one thing that I feel like I heard from you, Christina, that I think Stacia and Ariana have also said in their own ways, is each of you know yourselves so well. You know what works for you and what doesn't, what you're good at and where you have challenges, what supports you need and not. But it is very common for the professionals in those systems to doubt you, to doubt your own knowledge of yourself, and to try to insert what they think needs to happen onto you in a way that does not see you as a full human and does not see you as somebody who's an expert in yourself. And I think that is an additional common thread that happens in the world of disability and is again rooted in ableism. But yeah, thank you. Okay, gonna jump ahead. I'm paying attention to time. I'm gonna go on to the fourth question, and then we might see if we have to transition to some other things. But Stacia, this one comes back to you. As much as you feel comfortable sharing, like how are you doing right now? What's your sense of stability, safety, etc.?
So yeah, right now, all of, I guess kind of in a way on paper, a lot of the steps I took when I was homeless, sort of in a strategic way, did pay off because I was able, it was kind of just the perfect set of things. The Section 8 list happened to open up at that time since I was homeless during that time. When I got off the wait list, I was prioritized and was able to get a voucher. But I think it's tough because I think I might be considered like a success story. But I've been in contact with the ARC frequently about issues with Seattle Housing Authority. Seattle Housing Authority has been sued before, is currently being sued by the Department of Justice for disability related issues. They've been compared to King County Housing Authority as, specifically acting more like a, hard ass landlord versus, somebody, institution that's housing vulnerable people. And they will evict people with disabilities, behavioral health problems, physical health problems. They act as if they're just a landlord versus, the definition of the program is somebody, they're working with people who are vulnerable, and it's not reflected in that program. So it hasn't really given me this. I still feel scared, right? I feel scared I'm going to break some rule. When you get set up at SHA, they literally tell you, don't tell anybody you have a voucher, because somebody can just say, I smelled marijuana, if they're jealous, and just ruin your life. You don't need, it's kind of like a guilty before innocent type thing, and then you have to get so many people involved that most people don't recover from that. So I just kind of live in fear, especially with the past year. SHA wasn't paying my landlord. I had to get the ARC involved. I was getting eviction letters, eviction past due. This was during COVID, so it was okay, but I could have been illegally evicted if it weren't during COVID, and that was because SHA, the federal government, was not paying my landlord as their contract said they would do. So how am I supposed to actually feel particularly secure if SHA is not fulfilling their contract? If I have to get the ARC and all these other people involved, it's still me relying on these broken systems, and I could lose it instantly. So I'm a success story on paper, but not in terms of how I feel mentally. So
Thanks, Stacia. And I mean, I've heard similar stories as well, whether it be the housing authority or whether it be the fact that there are just endless errors that come through Social Security where people's checks don't get processed, or just so many different places that errors happen by the service system itself, that people who are housed still risk losing their housing, that it has nothing to do with them at all. And so that sense of stability is never fully there. And so you can imagine still that people's mental health, that their physical health, and all of that still is being impacted just by this ongoing stress that happens, even when you get into a place, and even when you have a voucher or you have some sort of subsidy to help you be there. So yeah, that is an absolute real thing, and I appreciate you sharing that, Stacia. Ariana, over to you. How are you doing right now? Like, what do you want to share in terms of your sense of safety and security and stability?
I'm doing pretty good. I met another trans person who was homeless, and we got a place together January 8th of 2019. This is our second apartment together. It's a little cheaper than the last one, but nicer, because that's a thing. And even though I lost my job during COVID, I got a part-time job at least for the rest of the year. So at least until through Christmas, I have this place and enough income to keep it.
I'm glad to hear that, at least. And I think when you and I had spoken before this event, had talked about that, it felt kind of, it's been fortuitous that you found a person where you are compatible roommates, but that hasn't always been the case, and it hasn't always been long lived. And so, what I heard you say is I'm okay right now. But I also feel like there's some underlying statements of that might not be a long-term statement, a long-term experience, but kind of thing. Is that
Someone like me living with another person, like Stacia said, it almost never works out. This is the longest running attempt though, and I try to stay positive about it. We're making it work.
Mhm.
But yeah, I know if that falls apart, then my whole life falls apart because I don't have enough money to live alone and there's no public housing in America. So
Yeah. Before Christina, before I pass it to you, I just want to invite anybody in the audience, if you have any questions for our panelists, please type them into the Q&A feature, not the chat feature, because we will try to take some time to respond to those. If not, we've got additional questions, but just let you know. So Christina, you've already told us a bit about kind of where you are now, but I'd love to, if you want to add anything, so kind of where are you now? Where do you want to be? How are you feeling about your stability and your safety, those things?
I can say I do not feel safe. I do not feel stable. I have essentially tried to beg for mental behavioral health services, and there's just none out there that's even willing to work with somebody with a brain injury right now. It's tough. It's tough to get up every day and with all the struggles and not just have that support there and have so much negativity and violence in your life. It just amazes me that, each day still, I'm still here. So.
Yep. And I feel like, again, that kind of goes to what Ariana was saying, is like, well, right now I'm okay, or today, like I'm still here today. What I don't hear is that sense of like, necessarily hope for the future, or sort of like the opportunity to truly thrive and truly be your best self, like with all the opportunities that your life has for you. That a lot of it is more of a survival thing and maintaining at least a sense of hope in order to get through the day kinds of things, but certainly not the longer picture. I see Ariana, you put in the chat, what is hope for the future? Stacia says it's always survival. So yeah. Just checking in based on time. Kimberly, do we have any Q&A questions that we want to present to the panel?
This is Kimberly. Yes, we actually have one, and it says, if you could imagine the perfect housing system with the most helpful wraparound services for your needs, what would it consist of?
And we can just, like, if you have thoughts on that, how about you just turn your camera on so we don't have to go in order. Ariana, yeah.
So at least for me here in Seattle, I would like skyscrapers with family units and individual units with wraparound services on the ground floor, and maybe about midway buildings, so you don't have to go too far. Therapists, you could have a pharmacy downstairs. All of that stuff just in the building. You could have the whole first 3 floors be a clinic. But that's what I would envision. Just something that doesn't say, hey, you have to go work. Hey, we're going to take $600 of your $700 this month, and you can figure out how you're going to buy toilet paper. But something that just gives you a place to live because you need it, with the expectation that you need a place and you're going to be better off that way. I think there's a study that says it costs $32,000 a year on average per society per homeless person. And it only costs like $8,000 to give us housing. I'm sure it'd only be a little bit more to include a therapist in the building, addiction rehabilitation center. Like, that's my dream.
Yeah, I love it.
I can kind of speak to that as well. I feel like multiple times in my life when I've gone through crisis, I've just broken down and be like, I need to be in wraparound support systems, permanent supportive housing. But that really isn't a great model for me. So if it was something kind of more in between, right, where it's because I had the experience where if I'm in crisis mode, it just, everything falls apart. Like if you try to use mental health services when you're in crisis mode, to the extent that you need them in crisis mode, you will be labeled a crisis problem patient. You will start losing access to those services just because you need them more. So it's like the rest of the year you spend trying to be a model patient. Then the second you need them for legitimate reasons, it's like, you know, you really need to be using those coping mechanisms we talked about the past year. It's like, I should have the right to come in and seek more services when I'm having a flare up. So that's where I always felt like something didn't fit for me. And where Ariana was talking about having something on the ground floor, like to call the crisis line, really, most of the time they're going to escalate that situation. It's absolutely useless. It's offensive that people give out that number. They do no good. Going to the ER does no good. So something, even these crisis centers, of which I only think there's one now in Edmonds or something like that. In other states, I've seen them where it's like in between the ER or something like that. But even that can escalate quite quickly. So something that's like an actual crisis service in your building, like there's a therapist there 24/7 for when you need that. They know you, they can protect you from the police coming in, they can protect you from all this abuse and having to interface with these other services more, and then becoming a problem patient, kicked out. That's essential. That's just something I've always missed, and then everything's fallen apart, often fallen apart. So to keep things from getting to that point, there needs to be something, like Ariana said, I wish it was integrated in housing.
Yeah. Christina, I see you.
Well, I know the special education process has a lot of flaws, but the concept of the individualized approach that it's supposed to have, what if we had an individualized life plan where we actually decided what we needed, when we needed it, and how we needed it, and then built the services around that to help support people with what they need, instead of trying to put us all in these pegs that we just don't fit in. That's one of the biggest issues I see with a lot of homeless services is, I don't fit in with what you've got, but I know what I need. So then let's say this is all what you need, and build the services around what people need, versus the other way around, build the services and expect the people to fit inside those services.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you so much. Those all of those things make so much sense. So for sake of time, I'm going to transition us. And if we do have extra time at the end, I know that our panelists had one more question that they had prepared for ahead of time. So if we have time, we'll circle back to it. But I want to make sure that we get enough time to spend with our additional guest speaker, Caitlin Hennon, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, Caitlin, please correct me, has been a staff attorney for the Housing Justice Project for over 2 years. As a disabled lawyer herself, she draws from her own experiences with mental illness to better understand her clients' positions and how she can best advocate for their needs. Caitlin tries to tackle each case with an empathetic framework, using the law as a tool to advance her client's goals and emphasize her client's humanity in practice and in the courtroom. And Caitlin's come to speak from the perspective of supporting people through the Housing Justice Project because she brings in that additional lens of disability and ableism into her work. So welcome, Caitlin.
Thanks, Robin. I'll tack on that introduction. My name is Caitlin Heinen. I tell folks it's like Heinz ketchup or Heineken beer. That helps you remember. I use she, her pronouns. I'm wearing a sleeveless button-up tank top with a black accent collar with a gray cardigan over that, some silver hoop earrings. I'm a redhead. I've got my hair up in a bun today, and I'm wearing my thicker, big kind of statement glasses. They're burgundy, and behind me I've got some decor in my living room at home. So I was asked to touch on a couple of questions, and the first one I was given was, how much is disability a part of the story with the folks you serve through the Housing Justice Project? And my first gut instinct when I read this question was easily 50%. Cut it down the line half. my tenant clients have disability, visible or invisible, diagnosed or even undiagnosed. And so this is where, in the process of getting to know my client and getting to know their case, what are the important facts? I always consider facts around their disability important, because whether the tenant client agrees that maybe their disability is a factor or may have been a barrier for them to navigate this eviction process, it's something that I want to have on my radar, so that way I can fully represent and advocate for their needs and interests as best as possible. It's hard because in the housing context, most folks are probably familiar with ADA requirements and accessibility when it comes to the building and development of housing. But in my work as a staff attorney for the Housing Justice Project and providing only eviction defense, most of my experience with disability comes in the context of how to navigate the eviction legal process itself. For example, do I have a client who needs an ASL interpreter? That's something to plan ahead for and react to the second I know that my tenant client needs that. Closed captioning is another service often provided by the court. The tricky part of this is that eviction proceedings are fast. Under the state legislative scheme for evictions, the legislator created this special process that very much mirrors the monthly rental cycle with which most people pay rent. That's very advantageous to a landlord to get a non-paying tenant out as soon as possible and get a paying tenant in. Yes, that absolutely upholds their business model, but it very much goes against the mission and values of myself and my colleagues at the Housing Justice Project, where we try to live by housing as a human right in our advocacy and our representation. And so we're trying to make sure that all parts of that very quick process are accessible to our clients. Sometimes I meet my clients the day of their hearing. That hasn't been the case as much since COVID. But what do I need to do to advocate for my client? Your Honor, my client needs that closed captioning service. I understand that the provider of that service is not here and available at the court today, and that is why the court must continue this hearing in order to allow my client to fully participate. And so I'm leaning on a lot of those very higher-minded principles of fairness and justice and due process that our country was founded on and that is embodied in our Constitution. And that's where my advocacy really comes into play. Another question that I got was, from your perspective, how is and is not disability considered and supported within the housing system? So again, I'll give the caveat that I can really only speak to disability in terms of eviction litigation. I would say that most disabilities are going to be considered by the court if a tenant advocate raises it as an equitable consideration, and especially if the tenant advocate is raising that in the context of asking for a reasonable accommodation. And that reasonable accommodation request could be something as simply as, I need more than the statutory 3 to 5 days that I could be evicted after my hearing. And it really does happen that fast. But if I have a mobility limited client, the physical act of moving and packing and getting all of your belongings out of a place, it's going to be really difficult, especially if my tenant client does not have a community to rely on, doesn't have family and friends to help them with that process. And so sometimes I'm using reasonable accommodation requests in the process of litigation to extend the floor that's established by the law and make it bigger, make it longer, make it more feasible or possible for my clients to achieve success or at least transition to the next place that they need to go. Where I find it the most difficult to have disability considerations recognized or supported is in more of those invisible disabilities, especially mental illness. A lot of mental illnesses and invisible mental disabilities can paralyze a person when they're going through the trauma of facing eviction and potentially homelessness. I'm working with someone who's at a very high level of stress. They're in crisis. And if they are already disabled, and that putting them into that heightened state through this eviction process is going to trigger a lot of those symptoms that impair their ability to meaningfully participate every step of the way through. Sadly, Washington case law is not supportive of recognizing that paralysis that comes with trauma and crisis and disabilities being triggered. More often than not, most of my clients' reason or excuse, as the law does call it, for not responding to an eviction summons or for not appearing in court for their hearing has more to do with some of that paralysis. I didn't understand the paperwork. I kept looking at it, and it just didn't register. I'm so scared about what's going to happen. I'm really nervous and fearful for what could happen. And so avoidance comes into play. If I just don't think about it, if I don't respond to it, then maybe it doesn't exist. And those are all things that many of us do to cope and make our way through life every day. And unfortunately, under the law, I didn't understand the law. I didn't understand the paperwork. The case law is very cold. It's very cold. The Washington courts have held that if you're literate, that's good enough. That's good enough. And sadly, if that's the only reason you didn't respond, then they're going to uphold that default in the landlord's favor. And so that's something I try to weave into the narrative in a more compelling way by making sure I'm couching that mental illness in the legal buzzwords that trigger those disability protections, that put an onus on the court to respect this request as a reasonable accommodation request. The other question I got is one that I do enjoy talking about because I think it's something everyone should know. How much do you lean on the ADA and Section 504, and where are the gaps? Well, here's the thing. I actually don't use the ADA because in the housing context, I'm actually using the FHA, the Fair Housing Act, a lot more. The same reasonable accommodation request process, that legal framework, it's gonna be the same as the ADA, but you are applying it in that housing context. And the Fair Housing Act is what covers disability discrimination in housing. The other one you want to be aware of is the Washington state law against discrimination. A lot of times the federal government, when it's creating its policies for the entire nation, it will try to be a bit broader, a little more vague, and so that it's setting the minimum, the floor. And then states can go beyond that, right? A lot of state constitutions provide stronger equal protection than the US federal Constitution. I'm from the state of Iowa, and although it may not, believe it or not, our state constitution's equal protection clause is a lot stronger. And that's why Iowa was the 9th state to legalize same-sex marriage. And so luckily here in Washington, we do have a robust Washington law against discrimination. And I find that that framework can be more helpful than bringing in federal law. Federal law, I find myself invoking, especially if I have a client in subsidized housing, because if they're in subsidized housing and receiving those federal subsidies, overall, most of the standards are slightly raised. So a simple lease violation that someone could be evicted for in a normal private landlord-tenant situation, that's not going to cut it in subsidized housing. Now, that doesn't mean they won't try. Stacia's experience with SHA really resonated with me, having litigated against them a lot. And sadly, yes, they do act like a private landlord a lot of the time. And it really is counterintuitive when you understand that SHA is public housing. And so, oh, I apologize. I lost my train of thought. I will move on to the fourth question. What do you recommend King County government consider change to make housing stability equitable to people with disabilities? Well, as you all saw, I lost my train of thought. That is something I have learned to get used to. My legal journey also started me on my mental health journey personally. And from this year onwards, that's become my disability journey. I've recognized that my generalized anxiety disorder, episodes of major depression, and secondary trauma very much disable me in my ability to do my job. And so I've learned a lot, having experienced it myself. And so when I think about this question of what do I recommend the King County government consider a change, I think about my dream legislation. How could you possibly embody in one law express recognition of all the ways invisible disabilities manifest in our lives, whether that's avoidance or that kind of paralysis or anxiety-induced procrastination? What if we were to live in a legal landscape that actually recognized that from the perspective of disability? And not this kind of cold, hard capitalist framework. Well, you can read, that's good enough. You should have been able to read what was in there. You should know how to Google and get yourself a lawyer if you needed help. And that's sadly the attitude of the courts and the tenor that's struck with what we do have under the law. So my dream legislation would be comprehensive, really spelling out what does it mean to bring that social model of disability into the law. I didn't actually know about the social model of disability until I began on my own disability journey this year. That's when I learned about the medical model of disability. And that's what I quickly realized, oh, we've got a legal model of disability too. And so it's challenging. It's challenging. There aren't easy answers. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me that Robin had mentioned earlier is that too often the lived experience of disabled persons is choosing the better of two evils. And that really resonated with me because I am too often in the position of asking my client, I need you to choose between these two options, and neither are good. And so I'm trying to acknowledge them in the moment, acknowledge how unfair this is, how unjust this is, but this is the law that we have, and these are the options we've got. Here's what I can do. This one might be weaker, this one might be stronger. I can't offer guarantees, but I'm going to do my best. And it's where I'm bringing my spirit and passion and my own lived experience and trying to draw on that as social fuel to communicate my message in the courtroom and make sure that I'm not just presenting the legal arguments that are going to get my tenant client what they need, but are really establishing their humanity in the courtroom. I'm not ashamed to say that I want that judge to be the most uncomfortable if he decides to rule against me and evict my client. But for now, I will stop there, and because we've got 5 minutes left, and I think that was the time I had.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Oh gosh, again, I wish that we had so much more time because I think there's so many more things to talk about and unpack and all of this. And a lot of different things came into my mind as you were speaking. But I think maybe as you wrapped up, I think what came to my mind first and foremost is, again, the way that we as a society, whether it be legally or otherwise, like are truly seeing and valuing like all people, and especially people with disabilities, is shaping all of these additional experiences in ways that clearly are not actually like equitable, fair, just, humane for our community. And additionally, the other piece that came to my mind, and I just am so thankful to know that you are doing the work you're doing, is just like we talk about the importance of, you know, kids of color seeing adult versions of themselves as teachers and as doctors and as therapists and things. It's so important to see disabled professionals in the field fighting for and advocating alongside and representing people with disabilities in any role, in addition, just being able to bring in that lived experience and that humility of the shared experience together. So I'm thankful to know that you exist, and also hopeful that that all of us together will continue to make an impact. So okay. Recognition of time, and just the fact that my heart is both full and also wanting more. I'm going to pass it back to Kimberly to wrap us up. So.
This is Kimberly. Thank you, everybody. I sent a couple of chat messages to Robin during this. I was just absolutely overwhelmed by your willingness to share your stories and to talk about these issues. Through the work that the King County Disability Consortium has done in the past 2 years now, we 100% recognize the value of personal lived experience storytelling. And by your willingness to share your stories with us, we're hoping that we will bring awareness to these issues and how they impact the disability community and others, and also public perception of how these issues impact us. Wow. I'm at a loss for words. That's not generally, it doesn't generally happen. Maybe it's probably the old age. It happens to be my birthday today. So I have really enjoyed sharing space with all of you today. It being my birthday and all, I didn't say anything at the beginning because I didn't want it to be at all about me, but I really have, this has been a present to me to be able to share space with all of you. So thank you so much. I'd like to thank all of the participants and the guests that have come to join us. As a reminder, this event was recorded and can be viewed on the King County Disability Consortium webpage at www.kingcountydisability.org/webinars. And in October, we're going to be discussing ableism within healthcare. Really excited to have a great panel there. So please join us on October 21st. You will be able to find the event on Eventbrite. And with that, I will thank you all and wish you all a great evening.